Well, Owen, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to have you on the blog.
I'm glad to be here.
So the first thing I ask everybody is just tell me your name, your title, and the company you work for.
My name is Owen Reader, and I'm the CEO of Indelible, which is a cannabis-focused marketing consultancy.
So not only are you the owner of this marketing consultancy, you are also the author of a book called The Pot Apocalypse, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It was the book, sort of the initial response to the release of The Pot Apocalypse that led myself and my business partner, Sabrina, to founding Indelible.
So this book that I have been reading over the past couple of weeks has some really interesting insights. And given that you wrote this a couple of years ago, I'm really curious how you arrived at insights like supply is going to quickly outstrip demand several years before anybody else in the industry did.
I will say, I think there were other people in the industry that were seeing it. I think that it wasn't very many. Most I think of the industry was pointing or was moving with a great degree of optimism. So I think it was being at the time that the book that I wrote the book, it was coming. I think we were in the middle of what they were calling the green rush, where everybody thought that there's just no way to lose money in this industry. Everybody's going to get rich, and there was a bunch of, I think, irresponsible research studies that were claiming probably fairly unrealistic industry growth rates, certainly unrealistic like projections of how many billions of dollars would be flowing through by 2024 or whatever the numbers were that they were using. And I think that those were the louder voices in the industry at the time. It was an industry that was really, most of the excitement was, I think, driven around the investor relations side of things rather than the actual product itself. So it wasn't really true to the products and whatnot, and true to the reality of what I kind of like to think of as turning fake money into real money, like turning the speculative investment into actual commerce. And I think that we were just looking at it from a different perspective. There was a few flags that I think led me towards the thesis in the first place. One of them being sort of the opinions or predictions around cultural adoption of cannabis. And my research and my experience as a marketer, as a consumer psychology expert, my perspective on it was that the adoption culturally would happen far more slowly than was being predicted by other people in the industry. And then that led me to questioning the dollar values of from the compound annual growth rate predictions and those kinds of things. And then after that, it was really just looking at the actual information. You could see 2 years ago that supply already was outstripping demand and that there was no sign of slowing. You could read about the, tens of thousands of square feet growing space that was being added to the industry, both north and south of the border, on a near daily basis at the time. So there was a supply and demand problem then that was being accelerated and enhanced by additional development. And then I could think you could see it in like the early results of some of these larger players bringing brands to market. And they weren't, no one cared. No one cared about what they had built.
Yeah. It's it's been interesting to go through this, seeing how things have played out over the past 2 years, like you said. I think we've all seen the headlines about the Canadian market really struggling with a vast oversupply of cannabis and them not knowing what to do with it.
Yeah. The bottom line here is that cannabis is a commodity, and there's no getting away from that. It is something. It certainly is different from like a grain crop or something like that on like the open prairies, but it is still a commodity. Maybe I think in some ways similar to how like omega-3, which is I think a fairly decent adjunct for CBD in a lot of ways. They're whether you're growing grain or producing, and isolating a molecule, it's still at the end of the day not really something that you have. It's not really something that you can expect anyone to care about. What drives the sort of a really wide and interesting price spectrum in a commodity space really is brand. It is the degree to which somebody would prefer your commodity over somebody else's commodity that's virtually the same in a lot of cases. Sometimes it is the same in our industry at the moment. And that was not something that was being factored for in the behavior of the industry at the time. So I think there were one or two players that were really trying to build some sort of relationship with their consumers, but for the most part, I think most brands were talking to their shareholders or to their investors or prospective investors more so than they were attempting to talk to a consumer. That's a huge warning sign. That's a huge red flag in a commodity space. If you're overtly talking about how much money you're going to make, you're going to accelerate the degree to which the industry proceeds to a full like status as a commodity. So
it's really interesting. When brands talk to investors more than consumers, it's a warning sign. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think some of that's improved, but I still think there's lots of bad behavior in that. I think where it's improved, it's probably because there has been no good news to share with investors for most of these companies anyway. So they've had to become a little bit quieter.
So as we get into the book in chapter 9, I believe it is, you say something that caught me off guard when I read it, and I'm sure catches a lot of other marketers off guard, that brands should seek to eliminate more than 80% of potential customers from ever interacting with them. And I definitely see where you're going with this, with making a connection with the right people, but that statistic surprised me.
Yeah, I think first of all, like the number is somewhat arbitrary, but it's meant to sort of represent the vast majority, not just a gentle majority, but the vast majority of the market should not be interesting to you. It's what I'm trying to communicate there is that if you're not a little bit nervous about how niche your focus is, then you're probably not niche enough in a commodity, in like a highly commoditized industry. Where I think people maybe interpret it incorrectly, in at least as it pertains to our perspective on the need for audience focus, is that a narrow audience focus, like a narrow target audience, is not opportunity limiting. It's actually opportunity enhancing in a lot of ways. So there's oftentimes a lot of nervousness. You will see like an organization that has a target persona, consumer persona for just about the entire like spectrum of humanity. 11 personas of very generic, people at all ages, all genders, all education, all income levels, all that stuff, and focus really on the demographics. The way that you get to narrow down to like a maximum 20%, I think that's even too much. Like I think you could go to like 1% or 2% of the addressable market, is at a psychographic level, not at a demographic level. So it has to do with segmenting what their values are, what their feelings are, their feelings and beliefs as it pertains to the industry, or maybe another industry that they've got interaction with and whatnot. And and in doing that, curating the experience of what it is that you offer to create a real connection with that person, as opposed to a passing, transitory or relationship of convenience. You want to make a connection with them that is strong enough to enable them or inspire them to advocate on your behalf. So where it sounds like you're limiting the total amount of money you can make as a business by limiting your total addressable market to a specific audience, what you're actually doing is you're creating a very passionate, vocal group of evangelists who will then talk about you as a brand or as a business freely, essentially acting as non-commissioned salespeople for your brand, which is like probably no more valuable than in this industry where we experience so many constraints on how we can communicate and how we can market. You know who doesn't have those constraints? Your customers. When they advocate, they can say whatever they want about the product, and that's a huge advantage. So, you know, I think if you really dig down into it and you sort of play it out, narrowing your total addressable market is probably like a 10x expansion on your total opportunity size.
Really driving home more of that repeat business from those people who love and appreciate what you do, rather than always trying to get new customers.
Certainly. I mean, I think that if you just want to look at it from a loyalty perspective, your cost of acquisition to customer lifetime value ratios improve with a greater degree of brand affinity, and so you'll see that even if they're not advocating, you're spending less money probably to achieve a greater lifetime value from a customer through repeat purchases or the upselling or cross-selling to things like accessories or swag or whatever it might be that you'd offer in an industry like this.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's an interesting point you raise. So you touched on your background in marketing, you run an agency now, but what brought you to working in cannabis in the first place?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. I'm new-ish, or I used to say, I guess not anymore. It feels like I've been in the industry for a while now. But you know, when I wrote the book, I was probably only 2 years in or something like that to having experience like working in the space. We were tasked with working with. So I kind of stumbled into it, is I guess the point. It was with my previous agency. We were tasked with coming into one of the largest organizations in the space, and use our customer and consumer insights and engagement frameworks to create a product development roadmap for the client, to give them a sense of like when they should begin to deploy capital to develop what kinds of products based on sort of a likely pace of social adoption, like a likely sort of cadence for what new emerging customers will be prepared to buy by 2020, by 2021, by 2022. And so my first sort of exposure to the speed, the culture, the excitement of this industry was there. And then I think, to be honest with you, I found the challenge of predicting societal adoption over time to be an interesting challenge. But I found that the task of, or the thought process of trying to understand how you would change someone's mind to enter the market, maybe even sooner than what they naturally would over the course of just a progression of values in society, to be able to persuade somebody to change their mind about such a contentious space, that stuff I found exciting. And so as soon as we sort of wrapped that project, it's kind of like, I usually say I went down a cannabis rabbit hole and I never came out, because I love the challenge of putting the work in to change the hearts and minds of a society that for 100 years have been told, this thing is evil, this thing is bad for you, it's dangerous, and it'll lead you nowhere. When I first tried cannabis, I remember feeling angry that I had been so misled about what this plant was. And that's, I think, probably where the excitement around changing people's minds comes from, because I know what a benefit it's been for me in my life, what a help it's been, what a joy it's been too. It is something also just to recreationally enjoy. And I want other people to be able to experience that without the stigma or the weight or the guilt or the fear that has been sort of smushed into their brains for the last however many years. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question there, but that's sort of the story, but it also maybe the motivation.
You are not the first person that I've heard say they really enjoy the challenge of being in the industry. So I think there's something to be said for that.
It's pioneering work. It's groundbreaking work. No one that I know has done this in terms of launching an industry in this way.
Yeah.
That is not for everyone. There's a lot there. It's very chaotic still, I think, this industry, and I have empathy for that. I think a lot of people are just trying to figure it. We're still trying to figure a lot of this stuff out, myself included. So you can't expect it to be sort of smooth sailing, but at the same time, there are still aspects of this industry that just demand discipline and demand, a very concise, logical approach. Like it is, at the end of the day, this is CPG, and there are just some things you do for CPG. There's just some things that marketers need to do for CPG, and many of them are not doing it. Mm-hmm. So it's one part old, one part new. It's an exciting little mashup.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've watched the industry over the past couple of years, what's something that you see happening right now that you're really excited about?
I am excited about sort of a softening, I would say, around people's perspectives on CBD, who are actually in the industry. I think a lot of times CBD, kind of because of the excitement that spawned from the Farm Bill in 18, I think CBD was kind of looked at as a bit of a circus by a lot of people in the industry for the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. I think particularly in Canada, where we've approached regulation of that particular molecule differently than it has been approached in the States. Mm-hmm. We've seen just sort of a lot of really slow investment there, like not a lot of excitement and not a lot of like intent around how to bring something meaningful in the CBD side of things. I think that's and then I think you can look even in the States, you can see that had this huge initial burst and rush, and then the FDA in, I think it was 2019, in the fall of 2019, kind of slapped the industry on the wrist a little bit and said, pump the brakes, you can't say this, we're not approving this. And a lot of retailers got quite gun shy of it. I think we're starting to see that soften up a bit, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of a movement towards some innovation in that space that I think will be good for people. I think there'll be some exciting products that'll come out as a result. The other thing I think I'm excited about is that there's a lot of like really, for a lot of times this industry only had what I would refer to as pioneer brands in it, where it was, product names and everything from product names to visual style to, brand names or whatever. They were all very much aimed at the prototypical. I call them pioneers. Other people kind of have like miss the mark a little bit, but refer to them as stoners. That's kind of like that deep, you know, long-standing engagement with cannabis culture. You know, and they were trying to bring products that it felt like everybody was kind of trying to, that was where they thought they needed to start. After spending the last few years trying to preach a different gospel, it's exciting for me to see a bunch of things on market that are bringing good products that are really for an emerging consumer. I think Ace Valley's done a nice job here in Canada of bringing something that's approachable. Love what Dad Grass and Mom Grass is doing. I've always loved Old Pal. You know, the insights that they bring around, like, this isn't just people who, you know, this isn't just for people who love cannabis. This is also for people who love being with friends or love, you know, be relaxing on a Friday night or whatever it might be. They don't necessarily have to be so deep into cannabis culture. So I'm excited by a lot of things. I think we're just heading into the pain of the pod apocalypse. I think we're just starting to feel that, but there's a lot of stuff to look forward to for sure.
Yeah, I love like walking into a dispensary right now is like going to a candy store. You know, you go from not being able to find any of these things legally available to just having such a variety spread out in front of you, from flour and edibles to drinks at this point, and patches and lotions and so many things that you never would have been able to get people who are not into cannabis to be excited about before.
Yeah, good point. Because I didn't even really get into the form factor side of things, because there's a lot of exciting things that are happening in regards to the form factors. It's not just 3.5 grams of dried flower anymore. There are other exciting things that are worth looking at that are being brought to market.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of on the opposite side of that, there's a lot of things happening in the industry right now that are not sustainable, as you've pointed out in your book. But what's one particular thing that really you think needs to end in the industry or change very quickly?
Well, so here's the thing. I think there are inevitabilities here. There are things that will happen whether we want them to happen or not, and that I would say that includes probably losing about 80%, maybe a touch higher, of the total number of brands that are on market. I think that there's too many, and there's too few of them that are remarkable, meaningful. So that's going to have to happen. It's an inevitability at this point. It's sprung up so fast. There's significantly more brands than there is attention span out there. So it's going to happen. What we, I think, need to be mindful of as an industry is where it happens, who's paying that price. Because right now, I think that with some of the things with how regulations have been set up, with there's promises made, you know, to the craft scene in particular, that I think are have not been fulfilled. Like, I think that they were promised that that there would be a space for them in this industry, and I think that the industry has not made space for them. And I think that's not, probably my personal preference is not that is not something that should be regulated. I believe the government should be less involved in this industry than it currently is. But I think that we as consumers, I think that processors, I think that good leadership inside of the craft community is required to make sure that we get that some of the unique stuff just doesn't disappear in favor of like the cheapest weed out there. It's hard, you know, there's a lot of price pressure right now. There's a lot of price pressure right now. There's a lot of points of distribution that are delisting things, you know, up here in Canada, the provinces that are delisting SKUs or entire brands altogether. We need to sort of have a conversation, I think, as an industry about what's worth saving here and be more intentional about it. I think, some of the, whether you like it or not, like the weed that you grew up smoking illegally was made by a craft producer. It was craft, whether it was labeled, whether it was good, whether it was bad, whether you knew what you're smoking or not, it was made by a craft producer. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting genetics that have been created. I think about BC Bud and like what a name BC had for itself. Those stories, that history, that richness, those genetics, they're at risk if the industry doesn't respond intentionally around what kinds of things we think are worth saving here, what kind of things we want to make sure that we carry forward and don't lose in the mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I see kind of this recurring theme in my conversations where there's a pretty evident divide in the cannabis industry between the types of people that you talked about that were really heavy on the investor side and turning, fake money into real money. And there's a lot of people on the opposite side of that who are really proud of the plant and what it stands for and what it can do for people and really want this to be a vehicle for communities and social justice and equity through this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of things that need to be answered for from the people who have been in control of this ingredient, this plant, whatever you want to think about it. There needs to be real conversations around the equity and what is equitable inside of this industry and inside of our societies. I won't comment much on it. I don't think I'm an expert there, but I do recognize that is needed. I'm somewhat more pragmatic around the fact that, as you said, there's a bit of a divide in the industry, and at the end of the day, the people who have the interest from the IR perspective, the investor relations perspective, and that's sort of wealth generation, that side of the conversation, which is an important side of the conversation. But those are the people that have the power to decide what stays and what doesn't, right? Because they can just outlast. If it gets bad, they look at what Hexo is doing. They're like, let's get right to the bottom of what we can sell this product for. Let's find the lowest price and let's talk loudly about it. Like that kind of thing puts a huge risk on the people that are not operating at the same kind of scale, that cannot cut as deeply as they can cut because they either don't have the bank accounts like the war chest, or they don't have the efficiencies of scale. We as consumers, we as other parts of this industry, I think we should just be aware of that. Let's not let price be the only thing that dictates whether you can pass through this what will be, I think, a fairly brief but severe period of disruption in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I hear a lot about in the cannabis space is a push for equity, inclusion, and making sure communities that have been disproportionately affected by prohibition of cannabis are allowed a space here. And it's something that I think plays out in different companies in a lot of different ways. So I'm curious if that plays into the branding that you do for companies at all, factoring in these different types of audiences.
Certainly, if it's authentic. If it's not authentic, then no, I wouldn't. If a founding team, if a leadership team within an organization truly cares and truly wants to make a difference, then yeah, I think, in those scenarios, that's an area I'd love to be creative about. What I don't love doing is paying lip service to really important issues, just to try to sort of pay a progressive tax, you know what I mean? Like pay the tax on looking like you're doing the right thing. It's got to be, at the end of the day, you know, lip service doesn't solve the problem. What we see in the cannabis industry, the inequity that we see in the cannabis industry, we see everywhere. It's not just the industry. There's some very poignant contrast between like making a lot of money and spending a lot of time in jail right now in this industry, which is one of the reasons why it comes into focus, I think. And it's, you know, this has been an industry, while illegal, that was, you know, disproportionately affected some people, some groups of people. I don't think the government is going to be the right sort of vehicle to solve that. I think that the private industry and true capitalism, which should be the thing that solves it, because I think the government made the mistakes. The government is the same body that created the circumstances for that inequity to exist. So my personal belief is that we as an industry, you know, should, I think, adhere to a moral standard that's appropriate for us, not dictated to us by the government. I think that consumers should be critical of brands that are paying lip service to something without actually, you know, contributing to a solution. And then I think that consumers from there should decide how to vote with their dollars. And if it is truly an aspect of critical importance, then I think that the market should respond to that. The industry, I should say, should respond to that in a thoughtful way that's based on listening to what people are saying. I hear this guy, and I don't want to sound jaded about it. I think it is important. I just think that we've talked a lot about it, and oftentimes we just expect that regulation is going to do it for us, or like the government's going to create some policy that's magically going to fix these problems. I just think the government made the problems in the first place. Why are you expecting them to fix it?
Yeah, absolutely.
If we all care about it, as an industry, we should do something. And if we all care about it, the first way that we can indicate that we care about it is by voting with our dollars. When we go into a retail shop, when we order online, when we go into a dispensary, whatever it might be, are you engaging with the brands that are creating a meaningful difference, or are you buying whatever's cheap? It's expensive to care.
It is expensive to care.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, let's make sure that we're, you know, the most effective thing that we can do is, like I said, vote with our dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a great point that regulations are not going to fix a problem that regulations created in the first place. And you see that a lot in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, totally you do. And it's you see it a lot, and you've seen multiple places where it's had a negative result. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you could just pick the example of California, where the taxes are so incredibly high. The gray market and the black markets are thriving because people simply can't afford it.
And the taxes are not providing any real value back to the industry.
Yeah.
Like those taxes aren't, anyways. Yeah, I agree.
Cannabis taxes are a whole separate discussion. I've seen people get really passionate.
That's the next book. That'll be the next book I write about. No, the taxation in this industry is something that I think needs to be really, really looked at. If we want this industry to succeed, if we want it to be diverse, we've got to find ways to stop punishing it stop kicking it while it's down. Like this is an industry that's barely had a chance to start to mature. We are seeing it begin to mature, but I think we're at the top of the third inning, maybe. Like we're still very early days here, and I think we have to find ways to alleviate the pressure, I think, that is placed on particularly on the smaller independent players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times something that people are quick to point to is higher taxes being a method of getting people who are not a fan of cannabis on board with legalization, but I don't think that's necessarily accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the money is the thing that's, drives the politics of it. But we're legal now. Do we want the industry to be healthy and thrive, and or do we want it to stagnate and recede? Because it takes money to do. It takes money to care. It takes money to care. Right now, all the money goes to the government. Like a crazy amount of the money in this industry just goes to the government. So there's a lot of hands in the pot, and that's a complicating factor in in addition to the slower consumer adoption, the supply and demand dynamics, the prevalence and pervasiveness of the gray market. The evolving regulations here are a big part of like the recipe that's been created to have us on the eve of such a disruptive time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you have the honor and the fun job of working with brands in the cannabis space who are looking to connect with consumers and really rise above the noise and survive the pot apocalypse. So when somebody comes to you, what do you want these brands to take away from working with your team beyond the deliverables?
Yeah, I think that if we were to just transplant one perspective into an organization, if we were to be successful at just giving them one, paradigm to employ, would be that when they make decisions, they don't make those decisions from a balance sheet. They make it from the perspective of a consumer. If you can, the most empathetic brands will win, because empathy allows you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and view the world from their perspective. And that, I think, is kind of in a lot of ways, is particularly in the early days of working with client, like in sort of the first, let's say 6 months. I think that's a lot of what we're doing for them, is just saying, let's make sure that decision is driven by the consumer, not driven by us, not driven by our predispositions, or by the expectations of shareholders. Short term, at least the short term expectation of shareholders. Mm-hmm. We aren't for everyone. We don't work with everyone, and not everyone wants to work with us. We tend to be more focused on the long term. We tend to be, at least for the time being, for the first probably 18 months to 2 years, really sort of not as reflective on the short-term metrics as potentially some organizations or some cultures might be. We really are, our mission is to create the legacy brands of this industry. You have, Coca-Cola as like the legacy brand of the soft drink industry. You've got brands like Levi's, the legacy brand of the denim industry, over 100 years old. You've got Carhartt, similar. One of my favorite is Filson. They were one of the original outfitters for the gold rush up to Alaska. These are, every industry has these sort of treasured spaces for the brands that have managed to maintain relevance over a period of a remarkable period of time, like not 10 years, not 20 years, but we're talking like 100, 120, 140 years of relevance with consumers. Our purpose is to create that brand or those brands within the cannabis space. It's the problems that we're trying to solve at the outset with our clients is, how are we going to be relevant 40 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now? How are we going to be relevant? Because so often when you look at the brands that have managed to, navigate such a long period of time, the ingredients that allowed them to do it were very much established in the DNA, the very foundations of the brand. One of my favorite stories in that regard is Carhartt. If you go to the Carhartt headquarters, still a family-owned business. Founded, I think 140 years ago, maybe. I might be getting that wrong, but it was the latter part of the 1800s, I think. Mm-hmm. They were they at the very beginning of their company wrote a customer charter when they started to mature as an organization. They wrote a customer charter, which was basically a single document, handwritten, that outlines the promises that they will make as an organization to their customers. And that document, which is written like on parchment paper with pen and ink, it looks like the Declaration of Independence. It still hangs in their head office behind a thick sheet of bulletproof, fireproof, whatever glass, because it's truly a treasure. It's an artifact of their brand. From the very early days of them starting, they knew they had laid out the principles that were going to make them relevant, allow them to navigate the changes in culture, the changes in the industry, the changes in trends. All of these really old, or like these rich older legacy brands, they all kind of share this focus and this like constitutional commitment to their values right at the very beginning. And so when we take on work with a new brand, a lot of the conversations we're having are on this kind of ridiculous, difficult to quantify timescapes. At the end of the day, rubber's got to hit the road. You got to make money today. You can't survive for 50 years or 100 years without making a sale. That's not relevance. Like, you have to solve relevance for today. But the key is you have to solve relevance today in a way that's going to preserve it for tomorrow. And a lot of that is, discipline around how you price a product, discipline on the kinds of promotions that you would engage with and wouldn't engage with, discipline in how you would respond to customer concerns or complaints or those kinds of things, discipline in how you engage with your employees. That's the kind of stuff that really makes it, it creates at least the breeding ground or for a legacy brand.
I love what you just said, solving relevance today in a way that preserves it for tomorrow. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's it. And it's hard work. It's not easy to do that because the realities of today are very noisy. The things that you need today are very loud. They appear very urgent, and for some people they are very urgent, and reality sometimes trumps the best laid plans, I think. But those two thoughts around long-term relevance and like a really strict focus on the consumer, I think create a paradigm that will allow an organization with the right talent, right product, and enough capital to be able to navigate this period of time fairly easily. I think for some people, they won't even notice that this is going on. It just won't affect them. Mm-hmm. But if you're starting to feel that struggle, now's the time. Like, now's the time to go and recommit to those things and take a really good look at how you're allocating your remaining capital in a way that's going to yield stability and resilience through this period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you guys are thinking 40, 50, 100 years ahead, because 100 years ago, the cannabis industry didn't look anything like this. And 100 years from now, we have no idea what it's going to look like or how we're going to be interacting with this plant. And I think that's incredible to be thinking that far down the line.
The easiest way to predict the future is to create it.
Absolutely.
I think that's Peter Drucker, maybe. It's not me. That's not my quote.
I have heard that one before. I do love it though. Mm-hmm. So you work with this plant, you get to interact with this plant, you've learned a lot about this plant. What is your favorite fun fact about cannabis?
Hmm. Um, that's a good question. I would say if I had to pick right now, I would say that I am fascinated by the fact that like all mammals have an endocannabinoid system, and I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but my understanding of the space would be that that means that at some point it was cannabis provided a broad, evolutionary advantage to whatever the root of that was. Where I don't know where it would have started with one sort of organism or one mammal or whatever it might have been. But like the point is that I think the point that I'm get excited thinking about is that like this isn't just getting high. We're in an ecosystem with this plant, with these plants, for a reason. Our bodies have evolved in a way that we can leverage for a variety of benefits the components of cannabis, and that's not by accident.
Yeah, absolutely. I only learned earlier this year that I had an endocannabinoid system, and my mind was blown. It was just shaking the foundation of what I thought I knew about my body, living all these years, not fully even understanding all the systems in my body.
Yeah, well, that's same with me. I know next to nothing. I know shameful little about it and then how it works and all that stuff. But for me, the interesting point was just the prevalence of it. Just saying like, wow, like we really are overdue for establishing a new context for this plant in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. If we started treating this system and our body as integral to our health, and therefore this plant as important to our health, what could happen?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Owen. This has been phenomenal. I'm so glad I got to chat with you.
I'm happy to have had the chance to engage in the conversation. Hopefully I didn't talk too much, but
no, it was phenomenal. Thank you.
Cool.